The team at Hyperkin deserves a round of applause. First and foremost, the Retron3 plays the games successfully, in high quality, including the Sega Genesis, which is the hardest of these three to play on third-party consoles. For whatever reason, I've seen other Genesis third-party machines that simply don't do the games justice. This one is very close, as you saw. I mean, I was splitting hairs, but the video quality is nearly identical to the Generation 1 Sega Genesis modified with S-Video. And this thing costs less than the S-Video modification. Very impressive, and it has stereo. As I showed you in the earlier shot, when this is powered up and you switch the dial and turn on the games, the lights on the side here will light up, letting you know what you're playing. You know, it's very simple, and that's what makes it good. It's not the most attractive game console because it just has so many things going on, but this one element is really nice, and it does kind of look like a piece of stereo equipment. Here's a close-up look at the NES controller ports. You get two of them. They're labeled and they work pretty well. Very tight fit. The Super Nintendo controller ports also work well, and here's the wireless thing that reads the wireless controller. And the Sega Genesis controller ports were a bit loose compared to my actual Sega Genesis. It had trouble with one Genesis controller, but everything else worked fine, as you can see there. The thing looks like a science experiment, and it takes a moment to get used to, but it's actually quite impressive because you can have all three games installed and just switch them depending on what you're playing. Now, obviously you want to have the power off when you switch the games, or at least they recommend that you do, but it's just very convenient. The only issue with that is the placement of the Genesis cartridge, because it's kind of hard to get in there and actually pull it out, because this thing does have a nice tight fit. There was no problems playing any of my games, including a few of them that were tricky to play, particularly the older NES games. I'll get to two small issues that I have with the Retron3. Not a big deal though. The NES games will not work with S-Video. I thought they did, but they don't. I tested it several times. The NES, which only has composite anyway, the actual NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, on here the NES games only play with composite video, and you do get simulated stereo, which is basically just mono audio out of left and right here. And it works well. The video quality is excellent. It's every bit as good as a working NES, if you can find one that's still working, and it's as good as my FC Twin, which I also use for game reviews. That's another third-party console that plays NES and Super Nintendo. The Sega Genesis works with S-Video. I think that's probably the biggest selling point. Even if you have all of the other stuff, the Retron3 is one of the most affordable ways to play Genesis games with S-Video, which is a higher quality video signal than just composite. The composite looks like composite. If you can get S-Video, use S-Video. It looks better on newer high-definition LCD televisions and HD TVs. The biggest issue that I have with the Retron3 is the controller, which kind of looks like a Sega Genesis controller. It kind of feels like one. It's a lot lighter. It's powered with two AAA batteries, and you can see it has a similar style to a Sega Genesis controller, but the buttons are not mapped up in the same way. It's very bizarre. The buttons, like the A button, is actually this button, and the B button is the A button. And if you don't believe me, we'll look on the box here. They even show you a diagram, the button diagram. It's very strange. Now, that would be a deal breaker, and I'd tell you absolutely not to get this thing were it not for the fact you can just play with the actual controllers, which are far better anyway. So, you know where this thing comes in handy is with NES games, because you only need two buttons, and they work fine. And the D-pad's actually not bad. It does feel like one of the later Sega Genesis controllers, and it's not too bad for Nintendo Entertainment System games. But for Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, really recommend the actual controllers, which you probably have anyway, and if you don't, they're really easy to find. The Retron3, three different game systems in one. 1, 2, 3. They could do better. Retron 4. Here we go. You definitely need an Atari 2600 add-on, which also means you put 7800 in there. There you go. Retron 5. Super Nintendo, Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Atari 2600, and Atari 7800, and 32X games. The Retron 6. Retron 7. Let's go, well. Retron 8. We got GameCube. They could put a GameCube slot back. I don't even know where that went. If we can play GameCube, you may as well also play PSP, right? PSP. And PlayStation 3, lots of big games come out for that. We'll add that on there. Xbox 360, in case I want to play some Transformers. Vectrex, so obviously they need a second screen on this thing for vector graphics. ColecoVision can sit up top there, balancing precariously over the Ninja. Magnavox Odyssey 2 has a handle, so maybe they could put an attachment where this hangs over it. And Game Boy.